I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and go out and buy a Mark 1 TT. Hello and welcome back to the Volkswizard channel. Now, as you probably noticed over the last few years, some of our favourite older Volkswagens and Audis have shot up in value, and this has put them out of the reach of the majority of enthusiasts. Take the original Golf R32 for example. These were changing hands for as little as £6,000 with about 60,000 miles on the clock 10 years ago. Today, you need to at least double that to get a good low miler. Even the largely uninspiring Golf 2.8 V6 4Motion, which looks just like any other Mark IV Golf apart from its mildly offensive wood dash inlays, is climbing in value, which makes the bargain basement prices of a very closely related model seem almost too good to be true, especially when it's a sleek two-door coupe with an iconic design that looks like it could have been launched just yesterday, and it has an interior lavished with brushed aluminium that still looks good today, not rather woeful woodwork. I'm talking about the original first generation Audi TT, which right now can be picked up for less than the price of a service on a Porsche Cayman. So in this series of videos, we're going to have a look at the Mark 1 TTs currently for sale. We're going to decide on which model is best to buy today. Then I'm going to dip into my 9-page buying guide that I wrote for Audi Driver magazine in 2017 to give you a definitive Mark 1 TT buying guide. And finally, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and go out and buy a Mark 1 TT, after no doubt having rejected quite a few along the way. But let's start off by looking at the various models of Mark 1 TT that are currently for sale here in the UK. Okay, before we have a look at the models, let's just quickly go back to 1999, 25 years ago, when the TT arrived in the UK. This copy of Audi Driver magazine has their first TT review. This is the September-October 99 issue. The then editor, the late Paul Harris, took the car on a road trip via Dover, and while he was waiting to get on the ferry, he says he was mobbed by people who wanted to get a closer look at the TT. It's easy to forget how much of a sensation this car was back then, and it makes their bargain basement prices today seem too good to be true. But I think it was such a sensation, Audi sold a lot of cars, and that's why there are so many on the used market. And I think right now supply exceeds demand, but that will not always be the case. Okay, on to the models then. So the first model we got in the UK was the 1.8T 180 Quattro Coupe. These started on a T-Reg as shown on this press car. Not long after that, we got the 225 version as well. They're basically the same car. They had the same 1.8T engine, but the one in the 225 was stronger. It had a bigger turbo as well. The only way you could really split them, particularly because you could spec a 180 to look like a 225, is the exhaust tailpipe. So the 180 had a single one to the left of the rear apron, and the 225 had a matching pair. And I'm sure that symmetry sold a lot of 225s. Audi UK were predicting in 1999, 80% would be 225s. I'm not sure if the proportion was that high, because there seem to be loads of 180s around, and today on the used market there's plenty of both. The Roadster versions arrived not long after as well, so for the first few years it was 1.8T 180 and 225 coupes and Roadsters, and the first one I actually drove was a 225 Roadster on a 99 V-Reg, and that was in Nimbus grey with the baseball glove tan leather. So baseball was a special type of leather with really thick stitching that was used on the concept car. Nimbus grey was as well. It was that primer colour that everybody called it. That today, I would say, probably one of the most investable cars to buy in, because it replicates the 1995 concept Roadster. Now in other markets, the entry-level car with a 1.8T 180 with front-wheel drive, but Audi UK decided they didn't want to import that. So the next real change was in 2001, where we got the often overlooked S-Line model. This wasn't on sale for very long because the changes to the S-Line, basically the 18-inch RS4 wheels, the alloy gear knob, they also had an S-Line badge, Everything apart from the badge was incorporated into the standard models for 2003 model year. So both 180 and 225 got the 18-inch RS4 wheels. Other than that, there weren't many other significant changes. In 2003, though, we got an even lower spec entry-level car here in the UK. It was a 1.8T 150, only available as a roadster, front-wheel drive as well. Unusually for a TT, it had cloth seats. It had 16-inch wheels, which were the standard spec on the original 180s, but these were a different style. Yeah, it didn't look particularly good unless you upgraded the wheels. Those front-wheel drive cars do actually drive really nicely. They feel more like a hot hatch. The Quattros feel a bit heavier. Speaking of heavier, in 2003 we also got the 3.2 Quattro, and this was available as manual or DSG. It was basically the Mark IV R32 engine, but the Mark IV was apparently 240 horsepower, the TT was 250. The DSG was sort of space-age technology back in 2003. Lamborghini Gallardo still had single clutch automated manuals that were dreadful. Here was a TT that had a flappy paddle twin clutch gearbox with lightning quick shifts. I recently drove a Mark IV R32 DSG in Germany, a model that wasn't available here, and whilst it was okay, and I'm sure it was really good back in the day, I think the manual is the way to go from a driving perspective, but also because there's a big risk of that gearbox going wrong, the DSG, and I just think from an investability perspective, manuals are going to be the way to go for cars like these, because soon nearly every car on sale will probably be automatic. And then we got some 1.8T front wheel drive 180 models, and within that we also got a Tiptronic automatic, which was an alternative to, I guess, the DSG and the 3.2. That's actually quite a nice car to drive. I sold one of those and yeah, I was really impressed by it. Anyway, towards the end of the run, we got the much hyped Quattro Sport 240. This had bucket seats as standard, very similar to pole positions. You could spec comfort seats if you didn't want those because they are a bit uncomfortable. There weren't that many colours available, but you could have a contrast roof, or they all had a contrast roof in black, whether it was silver or blue or red. I mean, if you had a black one without the contrast roof and you had the standard seats, was it really worth having it instead of a normal 225? Well, yeah, I think they were pretty nice to drive, but I would say that their prices today, much like the Mark IV Golf R32, are not good value for money, and there's much better value to be had elsewhere in the range. By the way, the Quattro Sport was released to celebrate 25 years of Quattro. There are also some really odd cars that are purple body with like a silver leather interior. I think there are some coupes and some roadsters of those, so you could have a purple roadster with silver leather Recaro bucket seats. I was originally drawn to those just for their sort of rarity, but actually those bucket seats are so uncomfortable. I don't think I'd ever be able to convince my wife to come out with me for a drive, and that kind of defeats the object of having a car like this. Also be aware, some of the early cars were left-hand drive models that were converted to right-hand drive, and I don't think you really want to get one of those. So have a look and see where the original dealer was. If it was in Germany or Belgium or Holland or France, then be suspicious, but back then you could import cars from Europe and save a lot of money, so there'll be a few genuine sort of grey imports that probably are okay, but from my experience there aren't many of those around, so a lot of cars registered outside the UK that are right-hand drive could well be conversions, so just check that carefully. In the next episode, we're going to have a look at Auto Trader and sift through the sort of hundreds of cars that are available and decide on a model that eventually I'm going to buy. So see you for that video very soon, but keep subscribing and keep commenting.